At my daughter-in-law's dinner party, her loudest friend laughed and called me a useless pensioner who only typed memos in a basement. My son said nothing. My daughter-in-law smiled. I just kept cutting my dinner until the most powerful man at the table stood up, called me Chief Mercer, and made her realize she had mocked the wrong woman. Lesson: never mistake silence for weakness. It started on a humid Tuesday evening in my own suburban Georgia home. My son, Leo, liked to let people believe the house was his, but the truth was simpler. It had been purchased with my late husband's inheritance, and the deed was still entirely in my name. His wife, Chloe, ran it like a minimalist boutique hotel anyway. I was 68, a widow, and to Chloe, I was merely an inconvenient piece of old furniture that washed dishes. That night, Chloe invited her real estate circle over. Among them was Harper, a woman whose voice could cut through drywall. She wore heavy gold jewelry that clinked against her wine glass. I sat at the far end of the dining table, quietly cutting my chicken breast into precise, uniform pieces. "So, Eleanor," Harper chimed in, her tone dripping with performative pity. "Chloe says you used to do government logistics back in the day. Is that just a fancy word for typing memos in a basement?" Across the table, Leo suddenly looked very interested in his mashed potatoes. Chloe smirked, taking a slow sip of her Chardonnay. They expected me to shrink, to blush, or to offer a meek explanation. Instead, I kept my hands steady, placing the knife down without making a sound. "Mostly paperwork, Harper," I said evenly. My voice lacked any defensive tremor. "Just tracking assets and verifying high-value targets." Harper snorted, waving a manicured hand. "Right. Well, in the real world, targets are luxury listings. You wouldn't survive a week in our office. It takes actual grit, not just sitting around waiting for a pension." I looked directly into her eyes. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply memorized the exact shade of arrogance on her face. The dinner conversation moved on, but the silence from my end of the table was already beginning to carry weight. The next morning, the house was quiet. Leo had already left for his office job, and Chloe was upstairs on a conference call. I walked into the kitchen, pulled out my personal ledger, and sat down at the breakfast bar. For the past 2 years, I had been transferring $500 every month into a joint household account to help them with groceries and utilities. Chloe had grown used to treating that account like a convenience fund for organic groceries, flowers, wine, and every little luxury she labeled as a household need. It was a gesture of goodwill, an old mother's way of contributing. But respect is a two-way street, and the toll booth had just closed. Using my banking app, I canceled the recurring transfer. Then, I called the utility company. The water and gas accounts were still in my name because I had opened them when the house was purchased, a detail Chloe often forgot in her haste to redecorate. I requested a separation of billing, routing the financial responsibility directly to Leo's email. When Chloe came downstairs, she didn't look at me. She grabbed an avocado and started slicing it aggressively. "Eleanor, Harper's firm is handling a massive commercial portfolio next week. We're hosting the celebration dinner here on Friday. I need you to stay out of the living area." "I see," I replied, rinsing my coffee mug. "Then I will require the space to be completely clear by Thursday night. I have my own arrangements." "Whatever," she muttered, typing on her phone. "Just don't leave your old crafting supplies in the hallway. It looks cluttered." I didn't tell her that those crafting supplies were actually 3 decades of meticulously cataloged government records, pension documents, and property deeds stored in a fireproof lockbox. I simply nodded, stepped into my master suite, and turned the heavy brass key in my bedroom door lock. Let her enjoy the quiet house while it lasted. The climate was about to change. By Wednesday, the atmosphere inside the house felt stretched tight, like a wire under tension. Chloe discovered the financial adjustment when the joint household debit card she often used for upscale groceries and dinner party errands was declined at an organic market. She stormed into the kitchen where I was making tea. "Eleanor, did something happen to your pension transfer? The joint account is short, and the electric bill just hit Leo's personal account." "Nothing happened to my pension," I said, watching the water come to a boil. "I simply redirected my funds. Since I am requested to remain out of the common spaces for your events, it is only logical that I stop subsidizing them." "We live here as a family," she snapped, her face turning a sharp pink. "You can't just change the rules without talking to us. Leo, tell her." Leo walked in from the garage, looking exhausted. He glanced at his wife, then at me. "Mom, come on. It's just $500. Why are you making a big deal out of it? It isn't the money." "Leo," I said softly, looking him dead in the eye. "It's the terms. If I am a tenant whose presence embarrasses your guests, I will act like a tenant. Tenants pay for their room, not your lifestyle." Leo flinched. He knew that tone. It was the same tone his father used right before a major tactical deployment. He pulled Chloe back by the arm, whispering something about handling it later. I took my tea back to my room. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I opened my laptop and looked at the deed to the property. The house belonged to me. Leo's name was not on the deed. He was only listed in my estate documents as a future beneficiary, with no equity while I was alive. They had mistaken my silence for submission. A tactical error they were about to realize. On Thursday afternoon, while Chloe was out coordinating flower arrangements for her grand dinner, a moving van pulled into the driveway. Two young men in gray uniforms walked up to the porch. I met them at the door with a clipboard. "Everything in the formal dining room needs to be moved into storage," I instructed them calmly. "The mahogany table, the china cabinet, and the upholstered chairs. Replace them with the folding staging furniture from the garage." Leo arrived home just as the movers were lifting the heavy dining table. His jaw dropped. "Mom, what is happening? Chloe's boss is coming tomorrow night. This furniture belonged to your grandmother." "Leo," I said, supervising the wrapping of the table legs. "It is my personal property. Since Chloe mentioned last week that the dark wood was stifling her aesthetic, I decided to secure it. The folding tables in the garage will suffice for her catered event." "Mom, you're ruining everything," Leo groaned, rubbing his face. "Chloe is going to lose her mind." "Then she should have invested in her own furniture," I replied smoothly. A real estate expert should understand the concept of asset management. When Chloe returned and saw the empty, echoed dining room, she didn't even yell. She just stared at the blank walls, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She threw her keys onto the counter and walked straight to her bedroom, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the framed prints in the hallway. I sat in my armchair, reading a book on financial forecasting. The board was set, and the pieces were moving exactly where I needed them to go. The big dinner was less than 24 hours away, and the foundation was already crumbling. Friday evening arrived with a cold breeze. The caterers Chloe hired looked thoroughly confused by the rented folding tables covered in white paper cloths, but they set up the platters anyway. By 7 o'clock, the house was filled with the loud, bright chatter of regional real estate executives. Harper arrived wearing a glittering emerald dress, her laughter booming down the hallway. Chloe was hovering around her boss, an older gentleman named Arthur Vance, who owned the largest agency in the state after building his fortune through federal contracting and commercial real estate. I had planned to stay in my room, but around 8, I needed to fetch my evening medication from the kitchen. I wore my usual simple gray cardigan and sensible slacks. As I walked past the dining area, Harper spotted me. "Oh, look, the logistics expert is out," she announced loudly, turning to the table of 8 executives. "Eleanor, we were just talking about high-stakes negotiations. Did you ever negotiate the price of paper clips in your basement office?" A few younger agents chuckled nervously. Chloe looked away, pretending to adjust a candle. Leo looked frozen. I stopped walking. I turned slowly to face the table. Paper clips weren't my specialty. "Harper," I said, keeping my voice conversational, "I dealt primarily with non-compliance protocols." Harper rolled her eyes, turning to Arthur Vance. "Arthur, you see what I mean? Some people just live in their own little worlds." Anyway, about the commercial plaza on 5th Street, but Arthur didn't answer her. He had stopped chewing. His eyes were locked on my face, his fork hovering inches from his plate. The color was slowly draining from his face, and the sudden shift in his posture made the entire table falter. Arthur Vance slowly set his fork down. It made a sharp clink against the porcelain. He pushed his chair back and stood up, his gaze never leaving my face. "Chief Mercer," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave. The table went completely silent. Harper blinked, looking between Arthur and me. "Arthur, what are you doing? It's just Chloe's mother-in-law." Arthur ignored her entirely. He walked around the folding table, his posture straightening into something resembling military precision. He stopped exactly 2 feet away from me and offered his hand. "I haven't seen you since the Pentagon briefing in 2008, ma'am." "I didn't know you were in Georgia." I shook his hand firmly. "Retired 2 years ago. Arthur, I see you went into the private sector. After what you pulled off in South America, you earned the rest," Arthur said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "The logistics team under your command saved my entire extraction unit. If your office hadn't cleared those assets, I wouldn't be sitting at this table tonight." Harper's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Chloe looked as if she had just watched the floor turn into water. Leo stared at his plate, his shoulders tense with a deep, crushing realization. It was a team effort. "Arthur," I said quietly, "though some people think it was just typing in a basement." Arthur turned his head slowly toward Harper, his eyes narrowing into a hard, professional glare. "Harper, if it weren't for Chief Mercer's typing, several people in this room would not have careers to brag about. You should choose your words with a great deal more care." The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate the room. The dinner party evaporated shortly after that. No one wanted to stay in a room where the atmosphere had turned from celebration to an absolute deep freeze. Arthur Vance left after giving me a respectful nod at the door, leaving Harper to scurry out behind him without saying another word. By 10 o'clock, the caterers were gone, leaving the white paper tablecloths crumpled on the folding tables. Chloe sat on the sofa, her face buried in her hands. Leo was pacing the kitchen, his phone buzzing with unanswered texts from his colleagues. I walked out to the kitchen to finally get my glass of water. "Mom," Leo started, his voice cracking slightly. "Why didn't you ever tell me Arthur Vance is the most powerful broker in the region? He practically runs this county." "You never asked." "Leo," I replied, taking a sip of water. "You were always too busy listening to Chloe explain how my presence affected the property value." Chloe looked up, her eyes red but devoid of tears. "Eleanor, I didn't know. Harper was just joking. We didn't mean any disrespect." "Disrespect is never a joke, Chloe," I said calmly. It is a choice. You chose to treat me like a liability in a house that my husband's money purchased. You chose to let your friends use me as a prop for their own amusement. We can fix this, Chloe said, her voice rising slightly with a hint of panic. I'll call Harper. I'll apologize to Arthur. We can make things right. You can't fix a broken boundary with a phone call, I said, putting my glass down. Tomorrow. Things are changing. I went back to my room and slept peacefully for the first time in months. By the next morning, Harper had been removed from the commercial portfolio she had spent all week bragging about. Arthur Vance did not raise his voice. He simply made one phone call, and the biggest deal of Harper's year no longer had her name attached to it. On Saturday morning, I didn't wait for them to wake up. By 8 o'clock, a local real estate appraiser I had hired independently arrived at the house. I let him in, guiding him through the rooms, while Leo and Chloe watched from the top of the stairs in stunned silence. The market value is strong in this neighborhood, the appraiser noted, filling out his digital forms. The structure is solid. Thank you, I said. Please send the final valuation report directly to my personal email by Monday morning. Once the appraiser left, Leo hurried down the stairs. Mom, what are you doing? Are you selling the house? Chloe followed him, her usual confidence completely stripped away. Eleanor, please. We can talk about this. We can pay you the $500 back. We can pay more. This was never about $500, I said, sitting down at the kitchen island. This house is an asset. I allowed you to live here under the assumption that we were building a supportive environment. Instead, I have been treated as an unpaid housekeeper who should remain invisible. Mom, I'm your son, Leo whispered, his passive nature finally crumbling into genuine fear. Where are we supposed to go? You are a 34-year-old man with a stable job. Leo, I replied, my voice steady and without malice. You will do what any adult does. You will find a place that fits your budget. I am restructuring my portfolio. Chloe looked at the empty space where the mahogany dining table used to stand. The reality of her financial dependence was finally setting in, and it didn't look like a luxury listing. The countdown had officially begun, and I wasn't offering any extensions. Over the next 30 days, the house underwent a silent transformation. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic confrontations, and no legal notices served. I didn't need them. The deed was entirely in my name, and the financial accounts were fully under my control. Leo and Chloe spent their weekends looking at modest two-bedroom apartments on the outskirts of the city. The country club lifestyle Chloe had tried so hard to project was no longer sustainable without my quiet financial backing. Every evening, I sat in the living room, which was now restored with my original furniture. Chloe stayed in her room. Her loud phone calls replaced by quiet, hushed conversations with moving companies. Leo began helping me with small chores around the house without being asked, taking out the trash, mowing the lawn, checking the oil in my car. One evening, Leo sat across from me on the porch. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you. I got used to just letting Chloe take charge because it was easier. Easier isn't always better. Leo, I said, watching the sun dip below the tree line. When you let someone else control the narrative, you lose your own voice. I spent my life ensuring that didn't happen to me. I won't let it happen in my own home. He nodded slowly, looking older, but sharper. The passivity was starting to wear off, replaced by a necessary dose of reality. We found an apartment, he said quietly. We move out on the 1st. Good, I replied. I'll ensure the keys are collected properly. The house was finally returning to its proper temperature. 3 months later, the house was entirely mine again. The minimalist decor Chloe had insisted upon was replaced by the warm, lived-in comfort of my own belongings. The silence inside the walls no longer felt hostile. It felt peaceful, earned, and clear. Leo and Chloe were settled into their apartment. The separation had done them some good. Without my presence to focus their frustrations on, they were forced to look at their own financial boundaries. Chloe had stopped hosting lavish dinners she couldn't afford, and Leo was finally taking charge of their household budget. One Sunday afternoon, Leo came over alone to help me clear some old boxes from the attic. Afterward, we sat on the back porch drinking iced tea, the Georgia heat softened by a gentle breeze. "Do you ever get lonely out here by yourself, Mom?" he asked, looking around the quiet yard. I smiled softly, taking a sip of my tea. The memory of the Pentagon, the deployments, and the decades of carrying heavy, classified secrets drifted through my mind. But they didn't weigh me down anymore. I had set my boundaries, protected my assets, and restored order to my own life without a single scream or a legal battle. "No, Leo," I said, my voice carrying the steady, unshakable calm that had defined my entire existence. "I don't get lonely. I finally have exactly what I worked my whole life to protect." He reached over and gently squeezed my hand. For the first time in years, the silence between us felt exactly like home. Real strength doesn't need a loud voice. It just needs a clear boundary and the willingness to stand behind it.